excellent day for an exorcism.
It sure is. And also a lovely day for another episode of the Top 10 Favorite, and from what I believe are the best performances by some of the greatest directors in cinematic history.
Right there, fella!
Yeah, I'm starting from 10 and then chasing a high-speed train all the way up to number 1 and exercise this. I have seen every film attainable of each artist I cover here. That's right, whatever is attainable. So every list is always coming from truthful and addicting accuracy. Listen up on this entry of one of the greatest directors of all time, folks. His name is simply William Friedkin. Known as Billy Friedkin commonly, he was born in Chicago, a great city for art, as an only child. He became interested in being a basketball professional at one point, since he was quite good at it, and since his dad was a semi-professional softball player, you can say that kind of worked out. Wasn't a good student academically, and didn't know what to do with his life, until he and his friends went to go see a little film called Citizen Kane, which was being re-released at this time. He became utterly captivated and a cinematic fanatic from his 20s on, molding into a good student of film. He immediately got a job in the mailroom at WGN-TV, and just like a lot of young, bright filmmakers, he immediately worked his way up to being a PA and then an assistant director for television. Because of certain documentaries that he was brilliant at bringing the zeitgeist of real drama to life, his career was off and running, and what a perfect time for his craft to be molded at the turn of the Hollywood studio system, where young, hopeful, and inspired filmmakers like Friedkin could thrive. Folks, when we talk about that great time in cinema, the easy writers and raging bulls like Peter Bogdanovich, Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, Robert Altman, Dennis Hopper, Brian De Palma, Martin Scorsese, William Friedkin is without a doubt one of the leading influencers of that time. He is both revered and respected so highly in both positive and negative views because of the very fact of how far he was willing to go as a director to bring real life to the screen, no matter how intense, how traumatizing it could be. Having studied journalism myself, you can't hold yourself back sometimes when there's a story of great meaning and importance that's being told here, and you want to go great lengths to give that story and those characters justice, but at the end of the day, still value the human being and value the trust that you want to build, which Friedkin had always been a trustworthy director, extremely caring to his actors. We'll talk about certain cases where that really didn't seem the case or the truth, and most of the controversy surrounding Friedkin's mistreatment of crew and actors were usually in the beginning of his high career, where he was still learning as an artist himself. Personal growth is so greatly important as an artist, and every time you heard Friedkin talk about his films, or film in general, he would have the utmost patient understanding, even if you disagreed with him and didn't like his films.
Fuck them and the horse they rode in on, and the ship that brought them over here, and the dog that walks behind them. Fuck them all.
Okay, maybe not all the time, but usually. Once again, we only rank film here, but I would be nuts not to mention his great episode he directed for the Alfred Hitchcock Hour entitled Off Season, which is so great. His films have ranged high and low, from intense to really intense, but all the while he has blessed the world with his thrilling films that will always stay in your memory and really in your dreams and perhaps in your nightmares. So strap on a Santa suit, have some fried chicken, and let's get cruising on the top 10 best films directed by the great, influential, one-of-a-kind, thrilling director, William Friedkin. Now, to start us off at number 10, quite unusual maybe, Blue Chips. The very vibrant, exciting, and physically exhausting sports drama Friedkin took on as a great challenge during a time of a brief, revived renaissance for himself. You talk about a basketball film that has more energy than any other basketball film that had been released until that time, literally making Hoosiers look like an after-school special. Just kidding. I love Hoosiers, but Nick Nolte, my God, and his best impersonation of real-life coach Bobby Knight dominates the screen as Pete Bell, who is an honest and hard coach who believes in the righteousness of athleticism, but he has to face the moral dilemma of big business corruption behind the scenes, boosting players and buying games rather than earning championships. Obviously incorporating Friedkin's own basketball skills and his phenomenal documentarian background, he cast real-life basketball players such as Penny Hardaway and Shaquille O'Neal, and featuring fun cameos from Larry Bird, Rick Pitino, Jerry Tarkanian, who coached at my alma mater, hey, Dickie V, and Bobby Knight himself, filming every game sequence for real and then just splicing certain moments from each real game to cater towards the story. Also, being such an actor's director, he helped and nurtured Nolte in his performance by shadowing Bobby Knight at many games for 3 weeks, so by the time filming began, Nolte could just improvise and really let it fly off the cuff. The film was a box office flop, unfortunately, but it still has a strong underground, not quite cult following today, for the realism and sweat of this film resonates so much with athletes and lovers of sports in general. But also the performances are just outstanding from Nolte, J.T. Walsh, Mary McDonnell, and Ed O'Neill, and so on. So the film certainly does stand out among the great punches Friedkin swung in storytelling. Number 9, The Boys in the Band. Ugh, how I actually wish this was much higher. I really do, because of how historically significant this film really is, let alone the groundbreaking play is by Matt Crowley, which premiered off-Broadway in 1968 and was absolutely destined to become a film. But it couldn't be a film filled with straight Hollywood stars. It had to be properly represented by the original actors from the play, some who happened to be gay indeed. The original cast thought it would be their original stage director, Robert Moore, to direct them for film, but considering that Moore never directed a film, it only made sense to have a director for cinematic flair like Friedkin. And Friedkin certainly never had the intention to change anything significant about the characters that the actors and Crowley built. However, he did rehearse them for 2 weeks for the camera, restaging certain scenes so it can read magically on camera. And there are great shots that give it a bright energy and a deep, self-deprecating beat that makes it both funny and moving. The film at times can be a bit slow, I'll be honest. However, it is a progressive movement in the lives of gay men living in the Upper East Side of New York. Though a bit dated, it is still a strong piece of filmmaking for the young Friedkin that Friedkin himself felt so proud of, and in his words, can watch again and again with pride. Number 8, Killer Joe. This also may be extremely surprising considering how powerful and of course how unapologetic this film is. That's obviously a common theme for Friedkin films, and this second collaboration with brilliant playwright Tracy Letts is a scream, both in hilarity as well as in fright. Based on Letts' own play, which premiered off-Broadway in 1994, but then revived in 1999 with some of the greatest actors of all time like common Tracy Letts partner Michael Shannon, Scott Glenn, and Amanda Plummer. So for a film version, who else would be perfect to direct it than Bill Friedkin? Because any one of us who knows the play, and speaking for myself since I had done the play, playing the role of Chris Smith in a production which was played by Emil Hirsch in the film, love that guy, Friedkin would add the right and accurate amount of sleaze and filth to this Southern Gothic comedy, which gave its film an NC-17 rating. Bill Friedkin was shocked to receive such a rating, but I mean, it checks out completely. For all the nudity, the merkins, the sexual content, the violence, it's extremely intense to say the least. I mean, doing the play was intense enough, so doing it for film can be even wilder. However, what is so great about Friedkin is how giving and trusting he is to his actors, which was confirmed by the whole ensemble. The story is very simple, where drug dealer Chris Smith is in horrible debt with sharks, and he needs money bad, so he devises a plan to have his mom killed to collect the life insurance policy. The man he and his dad Ansel, played perfectly by Thomas Hayden Church, hire Killer Joe Cooper, played brilliantly and chillingly by Matthew McConaughey, reviving the McConaissance and giving McConaughey the respect he absolutely deserves as a real actor. Twists and turns, romance and backstabbing literally galore, and it holds its very special place as technically being the last film Friedkin released in theaters before his unfortunate passing in 2023. I'll tell you one thing, if you dare watch this film, I hope it won't turn you away from fried chicken. I mean, unless you're vegan, that's alright. Number 7, cruising.
Who's here? I'm here. You're here.
Now I'm afraid.
If you tell me this is either shocking to be so low on this list or shocking to be so high on this list, you're both right. Because this film is certainly not for everyone. However, it is certainly one of the most notorious and infamous films in cinema, which its release certainly didn't help Friedkin's career, unfortunately. When you have a rough crime thriller about an NYPD officer going undercover, played by Al Pacino, to find a serial killer who's murdering the patrons of all the S&M bars in the West Village, you're bound for some controversy. Friedkin's own documentary, so to speak, on the S&M gay culture in New York. I say documentary in the sense that Friedkin attests that the footage shot in every one of the bars they shot, such as the Eagle's Nest and Mine Shaft, were real-life footage, and the extras were real patrons in the bars, members of the FFA, the Fist Fuckers of America. Friedkin himself went into these bars for research, wearing nothing but a jockstrap and leather vest, and had said he was the ugliest guy in the room. This obviously caused protests from members of the gay community for believing the film was anti-gay, and Friedkin always swore this film was not made to be anti-gay, only an exploration of that life in the dark leather, midnight-colored bars of this culture, which was also released a year before AIDS was starting to spread. Personally, the film is such a suffocatingly shocking film to watch, even to this day. It is purely a damn great film that is not meant to please the eye, but really to strap it wide open with a leather belt. And once again, Friedkin holds no apologies for the film's terrifying murder sequences. Performance-wise, I do wish Richard Gere played Pacino's role, which was originally intended, even though Pacino does his best in the role, showcasing genuine fear for each scene. But how does Friedkin feel about Al Pacino's process for the character and the film?
I don't give a flying fuck into a rolling donut about what Al Pacino thinks. Is that an answer to your question, Greg?
Loud and clear, Friedkin. One cannot take away just the realism that this picture demonstrates, given to the other true story of Paul Bateson, an actual radiologist that worked on one of Friedkin's earlier pictures, who was later on trial for his life for the murder of 8+ people in the same environment of these S&M bars. Friedkin met with him, and it very much looked like Bateson was guilty for one of the murders, and the other ones could very easily be done by other killers of the same culture. No spoiler for this film, but that piece of journalism speaks very much for how Friedkin is such a brilliant filmmaker and never answering any questions for the viewer, only showing what is happening and letting us, the audience, put the pieces together with still an open-ended ending. Friedkin still earned a poor Razzie nomination for Worst Director, which is really undeserved, and a trimmed-down theatrical cut missing 40 minutes of his original final cut footage, which some was added later to his unrated director's cut on DVD, which is still brilliant. Retrospectively, the film is very well respected and studied all over the world, for Friedkin was always a filmmaker who can make such a shocking and visceral film so engaging. Number 6, Bug. This may be way too high for most viewers, but let me tell you something, folks. The same vile, extreme, gut-stabbing energy Friedkin gave Tracy Letts' Killer Joe began with Tracy Letts' other breathtaking and thrilling play, Bug, which premiered in London in 1996, but made its off-Broadway debut in 2004 with Michael Shannon again reprising the role of Peter for the film. Because there is nobody else that can bring the audience to the edge like Shannon in this role. Also, Friedkin directs Ashley Judd in one of her best performances she's ever given, and honestly, most likely is her best performance on film. She savagely executes this role with intensity and a beautiful sensibility. Filmed on location in California and Louisiana, Friedkin gives fresh and sickened life to Letts' paranoia piece, which explores the dark themes of good and evil living in each and every one of us, and it's clearly right up Friedkin's alley. Friedkin and Letts' partnership here are just second to none, and any lovers of the play will confirm this film adaptation is certainly one of the best of the play to film adaptations, for Friedkin was always so smart to open up the play for cinema, but never too much where it seems like it's fluff. We feel the exact fear of paranoia and confusion that both characters are attacking and fighting with, which brings terrifying results. The film was not marketed well at all, so the film was not universally appreciated, but retrospectively, it holds a high title of scares and brilliance. Number 5, 12 Angry Men, the 1997 made-for-television remake, with some of the greatest actors ever comprised in a play-to-film adaptation, a legendary one at that. You probably have seen me talk about this winning film on the other top 10 videos of Jack Lemmon, Ossie Davis, and George C. Scott. And this absolutely won't be the last, because this is such a damn great film that Friedkin totally understood the essence, the captivating and heartbreaking elements that make this drama so timeless. The reason why for this remake was because Friedkin was so inspired to direct this film coming out of the O.J. Simpson trial, the trial of the century, since it literally swept the nation. Ingenious playwright Reginald Rose, still alive at that point, was willing to write a version of his masterpiece that would fit the modern times with a racially mixed cast, which is fantastic. Classic Friedkin. He had multiple camera setups so they could only do 1 to 2 takes a shot, because he knew if you cast it correctly and prepped properly, the shots can be achieved instantly. Of course, all the purists will always say this remake doesn't even hold a candle to the original. And come on, yes, the original classic is brilliant in every way, but when you look at a display of masterclass acting from every single actor here, you are blown away by the freedom, the strength of an ensemble, and a lot of respect and love has to be given to Friedkin for rallying a brilliant cast, not to mention trusting the amazing George C. Scott as juror number 3, delivering that powerful last monologue. This is only another clear example of how Friedkin really was a giving director for actors. For his amazing effort, Friedkin received his first and only Emmy nomination for Best Director. And in my humble opinion, it is one of the best and most valiant remakes of a classic that still holds strong. Number 4, To Live and Die in LA. One of the best neo-noirs of the 1980s, if you ask me, and to this day, reevaluated and praised in its retrospective as one of the greatest films of the 1980s that absolutely breathes all the seediness and harsh crime that lived in LA at the time, and still does in places. Based on real-life Secret Service agent Gerald Pedovich's book, which Friedkin only included about 20%. This film packs a Wang Chung punch from beginning to end. Consistent Friedkin, he shoots the hell out of this film with the utmost authenticity and accuracy that you would never imagine seeing. Another piece of this brilliant puzzle is how he casts unknowns at the time to lead this thriller, with William Peterson in his first film, Willem Dafoe, who was relatively still new, John Turturro, and John Pankow. Incredible. Peterson playing Secret Service agent Chance, really out to get a counterfeiting leader, Dafoe, after Chance's partner was killed. Because of the authenticity of counterfeiting here was so strong, having hired a real-life counterfeiter, making real money, Friedkin was eyeballed by the government and had to show a cut of the film in order to excuse the actual counterfeiting. Famously, one of the crew members stole the counterfeit money, and their son took that money to try to buy candy, which resulted in the Secret Service investigating Friedkin. The joy of working on a Friedkin set. Friedkin's score choice here is to die for, with Wang Chung kicking absolute ass with their main title number, as well as our composition of City of Angels. That's one of the best opening credit sequences I've ever seen as well. Of course, the gigantic and anxiety-fueling car chase on the highway is phenomenal. Actually driving on the wrong side, which they actually did, taking Friedkin about 6 weeks to shoot, which a lot has said rivals Friedkin's other famous car chase. The twists and turns that Friedkin adds in again are so shocking, and if you've seen it, you know it's 2/3 of the way in. When something happens to Peterson, I can't spoil it. You gotta watch it for yourself. But every time that happens, my God, it is so shocking that you can't believe Friedkin got away with it. You can definitely see Friedkin, like Agent Chance himself, loves to live on the edge. Number 3, Sorcerer. God, again, how I wish this was much, much higher, but it very much is at a perfect spot. Not acting as a remake of Clouseau's The Wages of Fear, but Friedkin's own take of Georges Arnaud's novel Le Salaire de la Peur, featuring 4 criminal outcasts on the run urgently, who are recruited to transport poorly kept dynamite 218 miles across the Latin American jungle, so they will get their prize money. But one little horrible bump on the road could set off the dynamite, so despite their differences, they all must work together to transport it safely. Tension, tension, and even more tension, folks. And I can't stress enough how amazing this film is, and still so blasphemous in how the film was so dismissed when it was released. Granted, released a month after George Lucas's Star Wars, which took everyone by stormtrooper. But once a filmmaker does something completely different but innovative, they are always criticized first, then praised years later. For those of you who have seen this classic, you know already its impact and the great filmmakers we have today. But you all need to know how gripping Friedkin makes this film from beginning to end, even if you haven't seen it, countering so many brilliant sequences with every one of our Outcast prologues in the intro, one by one, without a single word of English being spoken until 15-20 minutes into the film. The film very much has an edge to The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, one of Friedkin's favorite films, in that you feel the sweat, you feel the terrain, the desperation, and all the maddening challenges these men are faced with. The most iconic sequence, obviously, is that thunderous bridge scene where you are on the edge of your seat the whole entire time. How is that truck going to make it across the bridge? It's nail-biting excitement, so brilliantly shot on location in Mexico, which took $1 million and 3 months to shoot because of the drought and imported water Friedkin had to get, plus the helicopters to churn the water and storm it up, giving Friedkin that nickname, Hurricane Billy. The whole making of the film was indeed a perfect storm, making the filming process of Jaws look like a picnic, said star Roy Scheider, having crew members leave during production, even Friedkin's own DP, Dick Bush, leaving during production because of all the clashing, not to mention the high-tension clashing with Paramount Pictures. But reassessing the film years later, it is truly a masterpiece. All the hard work, the life-threatening stunts that Friedkin would guide would certainly not be duplicated by Friedkin himself, but it marks a time in filmmaking that the artist can go as far as they can when trying to achieve greatness. And with the added brilliant touch of Tangerine Dream's score, that Friedkin picked out personally, and again, an open-ended ending, you have an iconic piece of filmmaking that remains one of Quentin Tarantino's and Stephen King's favorite films. And for Hurricane Billy, Friedkin himself, it is his own personal favorite and best work, for it is the film that came the closest to his original vision. Number 2, The French Connection. Here. Hell yeah! This was one hell of a hard one to place at number 2 because of how historically thrilling and brilliant this Best Picture winner is, obviously being one of the most grittiest and thrilling films ever made, earning William Friedkin his first and only Academy Award for Best Director. Arguably the greatest achievement in Friedkin's career, which really earned him high praise, making him one of the hottest directors around. And with a film like this, very much in Friedkin's own documentary-like style, you can't deny the well-earned praise. Friedkin got the idea after viewing Costa Gavras' brilliant epic Z, to shoot it like a documentary, giving real images of brutal honesty and harsh patrolling in our beloved city of New York. Producer Daryl Zanuck said to Friedkin he can have the job if he can make the film for under $2 million. Friedkin said no problem, and was blessed to have the real French Connection cops, Eddie Egan and Sonny Grosso, on site as consultants, for the film was based on their own operation and book. I love the fact that the ever-so-magnetic and legendary Gene Hackman wasn't Friedkin's first choice, after wanting Jackie Gleason, James Caan, Peter Boyle, and journalist Jimmy Breslin, for God's sake. But with the combined talents of Hackman, Roy Scheider, and Fernando Rey, Friedkin would bring deeper depth to their characters with a lot of simple manipulation, scoffing at Hackman every time he did a take, so that would fuel his Popeye Doyle to rage.
You've been in Poughkeepsie, haven't you? I want to hear it! Come on! Yes, I've You've been there, right? Yeah. You sat on the edge of the bed, didn't you? You took off your shoes, put your finger between your toes, and picked your feet, didn't you? Now say it! Yes! All right.
It is truly amazing how Friedkin was able to get away with all the guerrilla-style filmmaking he and the crew did while making the film. I mean, who can forget arguably the greatest car chase in cinematic history, which, yes, done for frickin' real, with no permits, no permission. Every time I and the audiences around the world watch this, we are hanging on by a thread, at every move the criminals and the cops are making. And that was the beauty of the major theme Friedkin told stories about, the thin line between good and evil, that there is something controversially and sadly very similar and close between criminals and the heart of the law. Which is why I love Friedkin's ending with this one especially. How up in the air it is, and we don't know what the major outcome is. After almost 54 years since its release, The French Connection still holds up that many filmmakers today still cut their teeth on. And as much as Frankenheimer tried to make a great follow-up with French Connection 2, there is nothing like Billy Friedkin's 5-time Oscar-winning masterpiece that makes you realize you done did pick your feet in Poughkeepsie. Now, you invigorated viewers, here are some honorable mentions for you. Jade. Another notorious film of Friedkin's that was trashed heavily when it was released for its very confusing and a mess of a plot, written by Joe Esteras, the same writer of Basic Instinct and Showgirls. So here is his other mess of an erotic crime thriller that Friedkin claimed was one of his best works. And frankly, if you include his own director's cut in that mix, which the deleted scenes are available online, you can see there was something there. With the combined talents of Linda Fiorentino, Chaz Palminteri, and I guess former NYPD Blue star David Caruso, how could it be a stinker? Still, Friedkin knew how to glide a camera better than anybody, and his rough and real energy with a camera makes any poor film at least exciting. The real crime is making a boring movie, but Friedkin would never do such a thing. He'll try to one-up himself with that car chase with Caruso, which it has some cool shots. It can't be shat on too much. At the end of the day, Jade is certainly one of those films for a brilliant director that should have became more, but yet I applaud Friedkin to death for always attacking stories, no matter how poorly written, with hard-edged sincerity. The Hunted, a great, efficient, quiet thriller from Friedkin, which has always been thrown away as another rehash of Rambo. First Blood, that is. And yes, it is wildly similar. The direction of it all still retains the brutish grit that Friedkin does so well for his thrillers, and still directs great performances out of Tommy Lee Jones and Benicio del Toro, whom have such different acting methods, which Friedkin loves to have story time about. This also holds a little special place in my heart, for I remember it as one of the great movie showings my dad and I saw together. Bonding time over knife fights. You gotta love it. Rampage, a hard-to-find film from Friedkin that displays more of his strengths as a director, guiding a documentary-like crime courtroom thriller about Charles Reese, played by Alex MacArthur, who, on Christmas Day, starts murdering families, and the common structure of the police trying to catch him and achieve justice, even for someone who is criminally insane. The film unfortunately feels more like a made-for-TV movie in the more negative sense, which makes sense since this was a time frame where Friedkin's star directing power wasn't as popular. And funny enough, the film wasn't released until 1992, 5 years after it was made, because DEG, Dino De Laurentiis company, went bankrupt, so it was shelved, until Miramax picked it up, which didn't give it so much a wide release as intended. The original ending changed. Additional scenes were thrown in. Ennio Morricone's score kind of takes it into a different direction, but at the end of the day, it's a powerful statement on insanity. The Birthday Party, the comedy of menace classic, written by the master Harold Pinter, based on his play that Friedkin said himself was a dear passion project to direct. Friedkin also wrote in his own memoirs, The Friedkin Connection, that this was the first film he really wanted to make. Understood and felt passionate about, for he first saw the play in San Francisco and received funding pretty easily, considering it was quite cheap to make. Being a play-to-film adaptation, working closely with Pinter on casting, which was damn near perfect. Having a tight 10-day rehearsal period, the shooting schedule was on point, and the making of this film was very pivotal for Friedkin's very own style of filmmaking, as well as storytelling. Not explaining every absurd happening, and letting the audience fill in the open-ended conclusions with their own minds. Because again, the human imagination is much more powerful and scarier than what a filmmaker could just show point blank. Friedkin always reflected on this film being the heavy hitter that inspired him to tackle momentous projects, which yes, if you can tackle Pinter successfully, then you're on your way to becoming one of the true greats. The People vs. Paul Crump, one of the most important documentaries ever made, and indeed, one of the most important films of Friedkin's upcoming career, for it was Friedkin's very first film, covering the injustice that Paul Crump was facing, sitting on death row, about to get the electric chair at Cook County Jail in Chicago. Friedkin, being a local assistant director for television, took it upon himself to cover the story, believing in Paul Crump's innocence of a robbery gone wrong, resulting in a security guard getting killed. He reenacted the robbery with DP Bill Butler, who would go on to shoot frickin' Jaws and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, interviewed Paul and the important parties to the whole case. And for Friedkin's utterly courageous efforts, Paul Crump's sentence was changed to life in prison instead of the death penalty. It was huge, and it was in that moment indeed, Friedkin realized what the power of film could do. From this point, Friedkin was launched into the sincere big time, so to speak, as a director to be taken seriously. Number 1, my dear friends, The Exorcist.
Something beyond comprehension is happening to a little girl on this street, in this house. A man has been sent for as a last resort to try and save her.
One of the most shocking films ever made, and without a doubt, folks, his absolute historical best. Audiences from around the world, even audiences out of this world, I wouldn't be surprised, have been terrified of this film ever since its first spawning by the great writer and novelist William Peter Blatty, with his top-selling novel that is just as terrifying. This notoriously is the film where both filmmakers and audiences became kind of wary of Friedkin's craft as a director, for the behind the scenes of making this film are just as scary, if not scarier, mainly because of the deemed curse that surrounded the film after its release, the actual evil in the celluloid itself, as it had been said by Billy Graham. But Friedkin's methods of creating the most terrifying film of all time has been widely rejected, criticized, and yet applauded. When you have Billy Friedkin on set, firing off a gun close to one of his actors, Jason Miller and Linda Blair, to get a startled reaction, charging the studio $50,000 alone for the AC units freezing the possessed Reagan's room to create the sub-zero temperatures. Yep, it's actually damn cold on that set. Or asking one of his actors, Father William O'Malley, playing Father Dyer, "Do you trust me?" "Yes." And then slapping him so hard across the face to get the pain, sorrowful last rites in the end. You think, what possessed Friedkin to behave this way? And in Friedkin's own words, he wanted to bring such a danger to the screen that truly terrified audiences, that really shook people to their core about this story, which was based on a true story in Georgetown, D.C., and not far from where I grew up. Friedkin almost didn't get the job to direct this film. At first, they were looking at Stanley Kubrick, Arthur Penn, and Mike Nichols, even Peter Bogdanovich, who all passed on the project. And then after the studio saw Friedkin's French Connection and believed William Peter Blatty's own first-hand interaction with Friedkin after meeting him on a potential project that Friedkin was going to do for Blake Edwards, believing that Friedkin would never lie to the studio, never lie to the crew, and never lie to the viewer, he was hired. This was a set that required an actual priest to bless every day, for the subject matter was too much. But you hear from all the actors he worked with years later that they show nothing but gratitude to Friedkin for helming such a picture that stands the test of time. Every scene is so gripping. It feels ever so real, ever so frightening. And the performances from everyone around are just perfect for their characters. I mean, Ellen Burstyn, Jason Miller, my God, Max von Sydow, Lee J. Cobb. The partnership of Friedkin and William Peter Blatty of bringing the story to life is so vibrant here, and you get the heartwarming and fueling battle that Father Karras fights for his faith. Friedkin creating all the sequences of Damien climbing upstairs in a progressing motion, climbing towards faith. But then to come down and down for the greater good. It's so damn powerful. The film, of course, became the highest grossing film for Warner Brothers, certainly the highest grossing horror film, and resulting in 10 Oscar nominations, including Best Director for Friedkin, receiving massive amounts of hate from critics and audiences who have literally fainted, vomited, and have gone into therapy. But those who were shocked enough to be connected to it, The Exorcist absolutely remains one of the greatest films for cinema because of how Friedkin had no scruples, no fear himself about what he had to show. And is it vile? Sure. Do I admire him for it? You bet I do. I admire directors who take a chance, who take risks, because that's where the real art lies, when you're courageous and willing to go all the way. Obviously, all those methods would absolutely not fly today, nor I don't think they should. And as an artist, Friedkin sure did go all the way, any way he wanted. Not only directing the greatest films, but great episodes for television like The Alfred Hitchcock Hour, as I mentioned, but Tales from the Crypt, CSI, and even directing some of the finest operas of Puccini, Verdi, and others in DC, LA, and Europe. Also receiving the great honor of having his own street in his own native city, Chicago, William Friedkin Way, which was inducted and commemorated just last year. Not all artists are perfect. We all know that. His career had ups and downs like any great artist. But when it comes to an artist like Friedkin, we can respect the talents, the honesty, and balls to make art come alive in a collaborative fashion. Every interview he always gave, he was always so insightful, so giving, and so informative. It was always like taking a masterclass, listening to him speak on the platform. Needless to say, folks, he is one of my favorite directors and has inspired me to continue on when the going gets tough. Give it a little energy and faith, things will work out okay. Hurricane Billy, one of the last greats of 1970s cinema, but one of the last greats, period.
So long.
Ah, yes. But before you go, my friends, tell me, do you agree with my picks? What are your favorite films by this incredible auteur, Billy Friedkin? List in those comments below. If you haven't already, please subscribe and stay tuned for even more top 10s to come before the end of the year. Thank you all so much for watching, and make sure to stay safe out there.